Okay, everyone, we will go ahead and get started. First off, again, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much to everyone that is joining us today. My name is Ricardo Goodridge from the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC. Welcome you to today's webinar. This webinar is going to be kind of our concurrence or continuance of webinars for the Enhanced School Capacity to Address Youth Violence Program. And before we just even get too far into it, just want to acknowledge that so many of you may have recently started a new school year. So we hope that things are off to a smooth start. Hopefully there's not too many bumps and bruises as you're getting the new school year off and running. But again, just thank you all so much for being here today. Today, we have invited you for an interactive session on trauma-informed schools that will be led in part by Dr. Issa Feister of West End, along with contributions from Stacy Holdeman from Nelson County Schools. And so again, I just want to first thank both of our presenters today. And then to our sites, to our grantees, maybe to our staff from JJ. We know that all too often our schools are unfortunately the first to experience traumatic events. And it's become increasingly important to ensure that our students, our teachers, administrators, family members are equipped to talk about trauma, that they can recognize it, and that they have the supports. And just in our conversations with many of you, we know that you've seen firsthand kind of the fallout when students don't feel supported. And that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It can be something as small as an outburst to missing school to something much more serious on the spectrum. So recognizing that, and again, because it's the start of a new school year, we thought this was the perfect time just to reintroduce this topic on trauma and what it means to have a trauma-informed school, trauma-informed approaches. What we're really hoping for today is that this is a conversation. The flow, hopefully you will appreciate, will be a mix of sharing of information, blending in some, I would say, some practical examples. We want to encourage you to not just to be like silent, but to participate. Use the chat feature. We'll do our best to kind of monitor that. For those of you that might be a little bit shy, you're more than welcome to message me directly with your questions, and as appropriate, I could certainly upload them to the panel. But again, if you want to, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat. And then I'll also make a plug. For those of you, maybe a topic comes up that you want to maybe get into the weeds a little bit more on, we will have a virtual office hour tomorrow where that will be another opportunity for you to kind of raise questions in a little bit more detail. Again, if maybe you don't feel too comfortable today or if something kind of manifests itself later on. So just want you to know that there'll be multiple opportunities for you to engage with everyone that we have today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over again to Dr. Teresa Feister to kick us off. And again, thank you in advance to you and to Stacy, both for your time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ricardo. Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. I don't know about you, but this Monday came real fast and I was like, oh, we're doing things today. So here we are. So again, my name is Dr. Teresa Pfister, and I'm here to talk to you about trauma-informed schools and our roles in supporting them. So if you attended the convening last February, some of the material is going to feel familiar, but we've made changes that'll hopefully help address some more of the questions that you have, the things that you're facing. And I also think bringing Stacy in is going to be really excellent, and we're hoping to be super interactive today. The hope is that you'll gain important information and understanding about trauma and trauma-informed schools, but also best practices and strategies that you can apply. We've purposely designed the webinar to encourage that engagement, so please feel confident and comfortable sharing your voice and your experiences and your perspectives, and we look forward to engaging with you. So this is our disclaimer slide, just as a reminder that opinions, recommendations expressed in this webinar are mine or Stacy's and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Okay, so just a quick intro to tell you a little bit more about myself and why I'm here. So I'm originally from rural Wisconsin, a big family that prioritized education. And while they didn't necessarily understand why I felt the need to move to California, they supported me and I went to college there. I received a full ride to earn my undergraduate degree in English literature, so different from what I do now. From Pomona College. From there, I did the Peace Corps in Ethiopia, and then I moved to New York City to work in education. So I was an elementary school teacher in Brooklyn, and then I worked in the nonprofit sector. I worked closely with high school students from across the city. We were kind of like an after-school college prep program. From there, I moved south to the University of Virginia to earn my PhD in psychology from UVA. And now I work at West Ed in the Resilient and Healthy Schools and Communities content area. Here I do a mix of technical assistance and research, and my topics are trauma-informed schools, social emotional learning, school climate, and school-based mental health. And I'm going to pass it to Stacy and have Stacy introduce herself.
Yeah, so first, thanks for inviting me. I always just look forward to interacting and being able to share out just some practical examples of what things we're doing in the schools that really contribute to creating and fostering that trauma-informed environment. So I'm happy to be here with you all today. I'm Stacy Holderman. I am a licensed professional clinical counseling supervisor. For Nelson County Schools, I'm the director of mental health. And my role here, I say often that it's really been a career highlight for me because in Kentucky, there aren't a lot of clinicians who are fortunate enough to be doing exactly what I'm doing. So I've been able to come into the district and create and embed a fully functioning mental health clinic into the school district. So that has been really a career highlight for me. And I'm getting to see it just unfold, and the systems that we are building are coming to life, and students and their families are benefiting. So it really has been a joy for me. In addition to that, I taught for 23 years. So I'm an educator at heart. I taught for a community college and taught psychology courses and human services courses. So general psych, ethics courses, death and dying courses, things like that. Taught crisis intervention for a long time. So that coursework, of course, also blends really well into the work that I do now for the school district. So I do some clinical supervision for new therapists. I love that too, because again, that's blending the two things that I love the most, which are education and that clinical work. So I'm happy to share with you all today and answer any questions. And Dr. Feister is just going to kind of call on me randomly. So hopefully I won't disappoint, and I will be able to just share with you as we go along.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm actually going to call on you basically immediately.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to do is also harkening back to that convening in February, and I want to just get into a little bit about our whys. Stacy talked a little bit about why she's here. I talked a little bit about why I'm here, and I'd like to ask you as participants, why are you here? And so specifically, why are trauma-informed schools important to you in your work, or more generally, why trauma-informed work? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a Padlet in the chat, and this is where, and please let me know if the link doesn't work, this is where you can go ahead and kind of fill in, like feel free to create your own comment and explain why trauma-informed schools or trauma-informed work is important. And while we're doing that, I'm going to ask Stacy to share. Stacy, would you mind kind of talking us through?
Sure. So trauma-informed schools, it's almost like those are buzzwords to us now. We talk about trauma-informed schools a lot, and I think we're still learning and adapting as we really start to understand what it really means to look through that trauma lens as you're working in schools with students. I think for me, the reason it's so important in the work that I do, there are 12 schools that I support in the role that I'm currently in. And I really need those schools and those very important staff members, whether it's the administrative staff or the teaching staff, or the bus drivers, anyone really who has that contact with students. I need them to be able to look through a trauma lens. I need them to learn that we can better support students if they understand what trauma informed actually means. We can also manage those behaviors that pop up in classrooms so much easier if we have our trauma glasses on and we are looking through that lens at students. So really, I think for me, the answer really is, if we are in fact trauma informed, we can take care of students at a higher level. We can educate students at a higher level. We can meet their social emotional needs at a higher level. And things are going to just be better culturally in the environment, but also academically. So I think one thing that I'll also add to that is, often staff will ask questions about trauma-informed work. And a very common question is, how am I supposed to provide trauma-informed care if I don't know what the trauma is, or if I didn't know that student had a trauma? And so part of that education and the work I do is helping people to understand it's really a mind shift, a paradigm shift in the way that we're thinking, so that we can provide that trauma-informed care for everyone, no matter if there's a trauma event in their life or if it has impacted them in any certain way. So the training piece of it is a very big part of what I do, and just working with all the schools in my district to help people learn and grow and to keep that work alive, because this is not something you can do once and you're finished, all done, checkbox. It's not that. It's how do we really keep it alive and keep people really committed to the work and passionate about the work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacey. I feel like you just like perfectly prepped the entire the entire webinar today. I'm already seeing responses on the Padlet. Please let me know if you're having trouble accessing it. This is the first time I've used Padlet in a while. Thank you to Kristen, like definitely knowing that we want to create these environments that feel that are as safe as possible for our students, and having a trauma-informed lens is one of the key ways to do that, and making sure that we're bringing in, like Stevie's saying, like a culturally sensitive lens as well. I think that's really important. I want to give time, so I'm gonna maybe let's give us like 3 minutes, and people can continue to put their responses up in the Padlet. We'll stop talking and distracting you, so you're able to do that, and we'll come back together in 3 minutes. Thank you. Gonna give us a couple more seconds to finish up our thoughts. Thank you, everyone who added something to the Padlet, who responded to others. Just pulling out this idea of root causes, this idea of what's kind of going on underneath the surface, and how trauma-informed lens is really helpful in giving us that. It's a lens, right? Like giving us that way of looking at behavior as communication, what's going on, and then how we can support. Yeah, and right, Jenny, like not labeling kids as bad or kids as problems or tough or like all these other words that we use, but understanding that they're coming from. And Angela, thank you for sharing about your experience as an educator for over 2 decades. That it's really important when so many of our students are coming with having experienced trauma, that is part of the work that we're doing to make sure that those students have the opportunities to learn and develop and grow as they deserve to. So thank you all. I'm probably going to keep this up and refer back to it, but we're going to keep moving because we have so many things to talk about, and really excited to engage with you. So the roadmap for today, we already did the first one, which was to kind of reflect a little and share our whys for our engagement today. The second goal is to develop our understanding of trauma and its impact. So I'm going to be citing a lot of research and pulling definitions from SAMHSA and that sort of thing. The third is to dive into trauma-informed schools and what that is defined as, but also kind of what does that look like. And then I think my favorite part, and hopefully your favorite part too, will be digging into what this can look like. So we'll be sharing lots of kind of strategies that you'll be able to use. And then I'll also be asking Stacy for a lot of examples about what she does with her staff and her context. So that's our approach today. And I would love to start with the definition of trauma. And I'm actually wondering, Ricardo, are people able to unmute and do things? Okay, awesome. So if anyone
the chat might be easier though. I'm sorry, the chat might be easier because I
Yeah.
think I'd have to do them one by one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Okay, super helpful. Okay, awesome. So I'll go ahead and read. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to hear more of me now. I'm gonna go ahead and read, and then I will give you opportunities to respond in the chat, so just stay tuned. So this definition of trauma comes from SAMHSA. The reason that I pull it up is Stacy had already kind of named that there's like trauma and trauma-informed schools is kind of it's like a buzzword now. It's like really common. We're hearing it a lot. I'm seeing it all over like social media. And sometimes it's just misinformation, right? It's incorrect, or it's people are misunderstanding. And so I find it really helpful to start with a definition to kind of all get us grounded in the same place. So the definition from SAMHSA is trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances experienced or witnessed by an individual that amount to an overwhelming or life-changing effect on the individual's well-being. Trauma affects people in numerous and individualized ways, such as health complications, distrust of people, institutions, and systems, and an altered view of the world, beliefs, and spirituality. So what I really wanted to pull out of this definition is first that trauma is not an event. Trauma is our response to a traumatic event. The second thing I want to pull out is that trauma affects people in really individualized ways. And one way that this is explained to me is that you could have an event that 12 different people witness, and those 12 different people are going to have a very different experience, and their trauma is going to manifest differently. So one of the things that we'll do today is we'll talk about different like symptoms and ways that trauma can show up, but we'll also kind of expand that a little bit more and talk about how it varies immensely for individuals. Okay. Other key definitions that I wanted to just bring up, so we have them in our back pocket, are on the screen right now. So trauma is the umbrella term for what we'll be discussing today, but these are a few of the other key definitions that you might recognize as well. And I want to kind of cover them so you can see how they interact with and overlap with trauma. So the first one, which was mentioned in our Padlet, is ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. These are specific experiences that occur during childhood, such as abuse or neglect. Unlike trauma, ACEs are the actual event. And I believe at this point they've named the pandemic as an ACE, right? That it's a traumatic event that youth lived through. Toxic stress occurs when an individual experiences strong, frequent, and/or prolonged adversity without adequate support. It is the psychological stress response, and prolonged toxic stress can become trauma. Secondary traumatic stress is the emotional duress that results when an individual hears about the firsthand trauma experiences of another. This is going to be really important when we're talking about staff, particularly student and youth-facing staff. Historical trauma is the multi-generational trauma experienced by a specific cultural, racial, or ethnic group. It is related to major events that oppressed a particular group of people, such as slavery, the Holocaust, forced migration, or the colonization of Native people. This is related to, but different from, racial trauma. Racial trauma refers to the results of experiences of racial discrimination, harassment, violence, and microaggressions. So I put these up here just for making sure we have common language. And I wanted to just ask, and I think we'll use the chat for this, if there are any thoughts or questions about these definitions that we've gone through so far, the definitions that are up here, or even the definition of trauma. Are there any questions, observations, concerns before we keep moving? So hard when I can't see anyone.
No, Teresa, what we can do is a workaround, and I'll just try to monitor the chat. Is if you want to speak audibly, folks could just do the raise hand feature and just give me maybe like 2 beats to be behind you, and I'll acknowledge you, and we can try to do the talk that way. So that's another approach that folks can try as well.
Yeah, we can try that out. All right. Feel free if you have any questions as we're going along to put them in the chat, but I'll keep moving through the content and then we'll test that out, Ricardo. Okay, perfect. All right, so we've done a little bit about the definitions, and now I'd love to talk more about how trauma is impacting. I'll start with our children and youth, and we'll talk a bit about staff and then communities at large. So about 50 to 60% of children and youth in the US will have experienced some type of traumatic event by the time they reach adulthood. I will also point out that these numbers are pre-pandemic, and so we expect these numbers to actually be quite a bit higher. This is a list of some of the most common traumatic events in the US, according to SAMHSA. And thinking about your children and youth, I'd like to ask if there's anything you feel needs to be added to this list. I'm going to go ahead and read the events on the screen. And if you want to go ahead and put in the chat if there's anything that comes to mind that you would want added, please do that. So these traumatic events that SAMHSA says are most common are psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, domestic, community, or school violence, neglect, sudden or violent loss of a loved one, refugee or war experiences, military family-related stressors, physical or sexual assault, or serious accidents or life-threatening illness. Great, and I see a question from Ken. In the last week, we've had 2 instances where students are using Snapchat to share threats, including pics of gun. What category of trauma would this fit into? That's a great question. Stacy, do you have an immediate response to that? You're muted.
You're muted, Stacy.
Got it. It's interesting that Ken shares that, because I had to work on a situation today, Ken, that was very similar to what you described. And that is becoming part of our work that we're doing. And none of us are comfortable with that. I don't know that it fits into a specific category, but I do think that it's traumatic nonetheless for that particular student who may be causing the threat. There's something going on there. And then it's also very concerning for students who hear when that fear is elicited in others. That's also traumatic. Then students go home and they turn on the TV and maybe they're seeing events unfold that are really scary. So I think Ken is onto something here. I think that there's a rippling effect, and we're hearing about students who are scared to go to school sometimes. So whether it's a rumor, sometimes rumors are also happening. Things aren't true or substantiated, but it causes the fear nonetheless. So this is something schools are working through, unfortunately, very, very often.
I want to take a second. I'm going to allow, let's see, Daniel Silva, you've got your hand up. See if you can unmute now. You should be able to chat with us as well.
Okay, here we go. Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can. Good morning. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry we're a little late. We ran into some car problems. I'm here with Jerome Anderson. He's actually the youth coordinator at the school sites, and we're happy to be here with you.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday.
Likewise.
So my question was too, that how does trauma impact our children and youth? One of the things I'm seeing that is so prevalent along our youth in our school system today is definitely how it's affected their self-esteem, the ability to trust, and also the desire to fit in and acceptance. And so with that, it's leading them to a lot of negative peer association, but also more on top of that, they're projecting those negative experiences onto the relationships all around them, whether it be the teachers, their peers, you name it. And it's just another cause why emotional intelligence and self-awareness is so desired in this field. Any comments on that?
No, I really appreciate that. And we'll have a couple slides later. We're going to get into kind of exactly what you're saying, right? Like the impact of students experiencing trauma and being part of a community and how that impacts all of the relationships, whether directly or indirectly, and how it even changes the culture and climate of an entire space.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank
Stacey,
you.
thank you. Stacey, did you have something to respond as well?
I think it just goes back to that rippling effect. He just shared a lot of things that happen often when we have a student, a child who is impacted by a traumatic event. And there are so many different responses that people can have. And certainly he took time to mention a few of those. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for what you've added in the chat. I do think that these are all extremely important. I think the bullying and cyberbullying, as soon as you said it, I was like, this needs to be on this list. That's incredibly important. Experiences with in the home with parents with mental illness, experiences with poverty, or I was thinking about food insecurity, housing insecurity. I think that those are all really important additions. Thank you for sharing those. So this kind of gets into what our friends just brought up, right? The different kinds of symptoms that are going to show up for students, children, and youth who've experienced trauma. Same kind of situation here. Would love, as I'm reading through this list of symptoms, whatever is not shared in this list, please go ahead and put it in the chat. I think this, I'll just kind of be really transparent about what I'm doing. You know so much in your context, and I just want to make sure that that's being shared and not being missed because SAMHSA didn't have it on their list, right? So feel free to put in the chat as I read through some of these most common symptoms of trauma. Ooh. Nope. There we go. Physical symptoms such as headaches, stomach aches, poor appetite, and decline in self-care. Intense feelings of fear, anxiety, and concern for safety. Difficulty identifying how they're feeling, so that gets that emotional intelligence, self-awareness. Angry or aggressive outbursts, risk-taking behaviors, trouble trusting adults and peers, reading social cues, and building relationships. Difficulty paying attention and learning, time out of the classroom and school absences, suspensions or expulsions, higher referral rates to special education, and poor test scores and risk of failing grades. What else have you seen in your context?
I think we could add sleep problems and disturbances to that list. We oftentimes see that. And
Mhm.
sleep impacts everything. So
Yep.
that's one that certainly could be added to the list.
Mhm. Yep, and I see Kristen added depression, self-harm, see sensory seeking or avoiding, substance abuse, isolation, drug use. Yep.
Mhm.
Absolutely. What else do you think? I'm also thinking, and Stacey, I'd love your thoughts on this, that there are also symptoms that are more, almost more like pro-social or socially acceptable, right? So more like fawning behavior. So students or youth that are like really attached to staff or like are trying to spend a lot of time with staff or things like that are other, yes, Kristen, yeah. So these things that we might not see as a response to a traumatic event because we're like, oh, this is really sweet. And like, there's, nothing to be concerned with here.
Oftentimes schools, I know, will probably resonate with this. We also see teachers who will pick up on something and they will think that it may be a symptom that would be indicative of ADHD symptoms. And so that hyperactivity, kind of being driven almost like with a motor, just not being able to sit, moving around a whole lot. It oftentimes looks very hyperactive, but in fact, many times it's a response to trauma and it's having that impact on a person. So
absolutely. And I imagine that would also play into the higher incidences of referrals to special education because they're, showing symptoms of hyperactivity and then they're not getting the learning time that they need. And now they're getting referred to special education. All right. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that in. Oh, more from Becky. Yep. PTSD and ADHD. Yep. Oh, and autism, 100%. Thank y'all. So trauma also has impacts on our staff, right? We talked a little bit already about how trauma impacts relationships and communities. And so we do see our staff being affected. 40 to 75% of school staff and teachers have reported secondary traumatic stress, which is the stress of hearing about others' traumatic experiences. 70% of social workers have reported symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. And there was a study out of Chicago with a group of community violence interventionists, and 94% of them were reporting symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. These are really high numbers, and it has me thinking a lot about the importance of thinking about this youth and the adults supporting them, and we're actually going to be doing that later today, so we'll definitely do that. Just like last time, these are some of the most common symptoms, again, that the research has shown, and would love to hear again in the chat what else you've seen or maybe even experienced yourself that has not been included on this slide. So they're increased anxiety and depression, reduced energy and focus, trouble regulating emotions, trouble sleeping, feelings of hopelessness and isolation, strained personal relationships, diminished capacity to maintain positive staff-student or staff-caregiver relationships, and poor attendance or work performance. Other thoughts on what could be added here as symptoms that staff may show for secondary traumatic stress? Burnout. Yep. Absolutely. Stacey, anything that comes to mind specifically for you?
I think we're going to talk about this on another slide, but I can kind of jump into it here as well. For me, I really want to keep a good pulse on the therapists that work on my team, because we do really hard work all day long. And we are working with individuals who have experienced unspeakable traumatic events. Things that, and I know that the people who are in this webinar understand what I'm talking about. Things that perhaps you even sometimes want to unhear yourself. It was hard to hear it the first time. Now it's going to be hard if you're a therapist or a school-based mental health provider coming in, working with that individual week after week and trying to help them as they're healing. It does take a toll on the helper as well. And so today, it's funny because the room that I'm set up in, as I'm providing information and interacting in this webinar, I can hear my staff starting to come in on the other side of the wall here. But we're going to have time together today where we're going to eat some food and take care of each other and really talk about, you know, how is everybody after we had a big crisis response about a week ago. So it's a time just to do like a pulse check. How's everybody doing? How are you taking care of yourself? And so sometimes I have been guilty of thinking, oh, we don't have time for that. We have to hurry and work. And so this work is also very, very important to keep us about the work. So I hope that helps a little bit, Teresa, as we're just kind of blending some of these examples in with what you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Stacey. So we're going to have like plenty of time to talk about. I just want to say, yes, we are absolutely going to talk about staff care things, and hopefully do a lot of kind of like knowledge sharing and best practice sharing, like amongst us here. But before we get there, just wanted to cover that there is a measurable, we love to say this in research, there is a measurable impact on communities when there are high rates of trauma. And so these are the basically symptoms in the community that even students who have not directly experienced a traumatic event can feel and experience by being in a community that has high rates of uncared for, untreated trauma. This includes increased violence, aggression, and bullying, decreased trust, respect, and collaboration, reduced sense of safety, belonging, and community, lowered academic expectations, motivation, and performance, higher rates of absenteeism, dropout, and suspension, diminished self-efficacy, reliance, and coping skills, and increased symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress. I've seen this list just has me thinking about how deeply connected we are in our communities. And when we're talking about self and community care later, that's something that I'm keeping in mind as well, as like, how are we supporting each other and helping each other? Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you believe should be on this slide that hasn't been included? So any symptoms in a community that has high rates of trauma, kind of as a whole? I think my first thought is that kind of gets into it with the decreased trust, respect, and collaboration, but I do imagine like more tension in relationships, right? That relationships among peers, between staff and students, and between families and staff are probably taking a hit. But any other thoughts on what could be missing?
I think we're seeing a lot of turnover, staff turnover in schools. And in other community settings where that secondary trauma is pretty high. So that is not new, but I think it's important to mention because the way that we have to really work to combat that is with more training and more support and more self-care. And so I just think it's so very important that you're spending time talking about that today, because as leaders in our work, we have to figure out how to really take care of the people who are taking care of the people. So I think it's really great.
Thank you, Stacey. All right, so I don't know about you, but I feel like the last couple slides have been really heavy and a lot about the hard stuff. And I really want to make sure that our orientation as we're moving forward is empowerment based, is healing based. And so I wanted to share this quote to remind myself and remind all of us. So this is a quote from Shauna Murray Brown, and it is, "Healing is a collective journey. It takes a village to create a community that supports our best selves and helps us to heal." So this reminds me we're not on a solo journey here, and I hope that this webinar is one example of how we can be collectively working together to create connection and healing. So let's go ahead and start talking about how we can do that through the lens of trauma-informed schools. So there are, if you have ever Googled trauma-informed schools, lots of definitions, and this happens to be my favorite. It comes out of Missouri. It's the Missouri model for trauma-informed schools. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and I'd love to ask you again to engage in the chat, or feel free to use that raise hand feature, and let me know what stands out to you in this definition, or kind of like what grabs you in this definition. So trauma-informed schools are places that provide safe and supportive environments for children to learn and educators to work. They infuse the science about trauma and its impact into daily practice, program design, policy creation and implementation, and the culture of the school. A trauma-informed school is not simply a school where staff know about trauma, or a school where there is a therapeutic classroom or additional counseling staff. A trauma-informed school fundamentally has changed the way it works to promote healthy, resilient educators and learners capable of disrupting the cycle of trauma in their lives and communities and creating more equitable outcomes. I love that definition. Any responses to what kind of stands out to you in this definition?
It's definitely ongoing work. And I'm really curious if anyone's going to put in the chat who's from a school, just how do they keep that work alive? How do they keep that momentum going? Because what you see often in our public schools, there will be a training, and then people get back to work. And then there's a training, and you'll be about the business for a while, and then people get back to work. And so that's one of the challenges I have and that I'm always working on. So if anybody has anything they can contribute in that regard, it might be very helpful to people on this call.
And Teresa and Stacey, just want to pause to acknowledge someone who's got their hand up. Go ahead, Daniel.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, thank you. First, I would definitely like to say we deal with this in the schools in California a lot. In our certain districts, Washington Unified School District, we're dealing with this to the point to where we're asking for, it's a gentleman named Mr. Ray Lozada, and he has a program called Project Safe Schools. And so it's reimagining school safety on a whole new different level. So they take out law enforcement out of it, but they put incredible messengers with lived experiences. It could be mothers, someone who's overcome trauma, whatever it may be. They're the ones roaming the hallways and enter into the hearts of these youth to foster these relationships with them that they can de-escalate violence by articulating the youth's core values, beliefs, or maybe their current successes. It's something that's completely worked. We've also been successful with working with social workers along with credible messengers with lived experiences. We use what is called spacious leadership, which is we educate the youth to educate the youth. When it comes to anti-bullying, the difference between being a bystander and an upstander, but also even for them to, we're shattering the culture where you feel unempowered by being able to ask for help. We share with them that's where their power is, by shining the light and awareness on some of these problems.
Love that. Thank you so much. I wish I had written all of that down. I'm going to ask you to share it again when we get into practices later on, because those are all such great examples that really speak to the relational aspect, the thinking outside of the box, right? Like thinking about how do we really cultivate these community partnerships to get the support to the students that we need. And thank you so much. That was so helpful.
Thank you.
Also seeing in the chat from Jennifer, the quote fundamentally has changed the way it works. I agree. That was one of my most favorite, that it's not just a training that we're going to forget about, but it's something that we are changing the way that we're looking at things and the way that we do business. The focus on safety and belonging. Thank you, Angela. That's super, super helpful. Yes, absolutely. And so this is kind of our like our vision for what we're hoping when we're talking about trauma-informed schools. This is kind of where we want to be. And so one of the ways that we're hoping to get there is using MTSS, so multi-tiered systems of support. This is not a need to have, but I find it really helpful to kind of use this framing to understand what we provide for all students, and then how we kind of up the support as it is needed. So multi-tiered systems of support, this starts with the universal intervention or universal instruction, and typically this provides what 80% of students need to be successful. It's high quality, it's school-wide, and it kind of spans academic, social, emotional, and behavioral programming and supports to get your students what they need. Tier 2 is when we kind of move into small group interventions, and this is going to kind of just like up what it is the student needs to succeed. And then tier 3, which Stacey's going to talk more about later in this session, is this individual intervention that is specialized and adapted to the student's specific needs. Now, the next Padlet that I'm going to be giving you is going to be about this slide. These are some of the common examples of tiers 1, 2, and 3 trauma-informed supports. And what I tried to do, and you're going to have to let me know again if it worked, what I tried to do is put that in the Padlet. Nope, that's the wrong one. Nope, don't do that one. Okay, that's the correct link. So the second link is the link that you want to use. And I would love to have in this Padlet together your thoughts and responses on things that you've maybe tried before, or things that you do in your context, or things that you are interested in learning more about. This is to kind of like support our conversation today, but also to think about what future webinars we can provide you based on the things that you're interested in learning more about and engaging with. Can someone tell me if that link is working?
It's working.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of just like read through these examples and kind of describe them a little bit. And I welcome you to go ahead and get started, like adding your little Post-it notes throughout and letting us know things that you have done or you are doing, or things that you are interested in doing, learning more about. So in tier 1, we have staff self and community care, which is something we're going to talk more about today. We have positive teacher-student relationships, broadening this to staff-student relationships or adult-student relationships. Professional development focused on trauma for all staff. And this gets into what Stacey was saying at the beginning, right? It's not just for your teachers, your classroom teachers, but we're also making sure that all staff that are engaging with students have this training. Classroom routines for self-regulation, social emotional learning curriculum, regular class meetings, check-ins, and/or circles. So this sounds a little bit about, a little like what Stacey does with her staff, but thinking about it as an adult working with youth, that you have opportunities for check-ins, so you're able to kind of see, temperature check where your students are and how they're doing. Outreach to community partners, collaboration with families, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, but we have an upcoming webinar that's going to be all about that. So promise we'll have lots of best practices there. Culturally responsive approaches, which we saw in that first Padlet, and restorative practices. So those are all your tier 1. Those are all kind of like best practices that schools should be engaging in. And then tier 2, as we get into that kind of small group intervention, we have a calm, I've heard different things. I've heard calm space, calm room, like peace corner. I've heard lots of different names, but it's an idea that it's kind of this set apart space that students are able to go to self-regulate or co-regulate with different supports there. Small groups or classes for specialized instruction. I talked about this a little bit at the convening in February, but this can look it can be adapted to whatever the students need. It can be social emotional learning. It can be relationship building. It can be skill building. It can be lots of different things. Partnering with community organizations to support families, student mentoring programs. I think this gets to what our friends were just saying about empowering youth to empower other youth, and identifying and removing barriers to family involvement. Tier 3, we get into individual student intervention plans, individual therapeutic counseling, regular communication with family, and then wraparound services. So I'm going to let y'all kind of respond on the Padlet. So again, you can go ahead and mark where things that you are already doing and then things that you are interested in doing in your context. And then I might pass it to you, Stacy, if there's anything that you're thinking particularly about any of these or anything that isn't up here. I'll give us about 4 minutes to kind of fill this out. Please let me know if you need more time. Thank you to everyone who's participating. Please feel free to continue adding things to our Padlet. I really appreciate these examples. I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, but BOTFIN, life skills education, prevention activities, counseling, social emotional learning, brain breaks, restorative chats, emotion regulation support, counseling, education for staff. Staff circle time was something that I really appreciated when I was a teacher. Culturally responsive approaches, more PD, absolutely. And I love when we're really thinking about PD, that we're integrating different things together, right? So integrating trauma-informed approaches into your social emotional learning curriculum, you know, things like that. All right, so I'm getting the 30-minute warning, so we're gonna start moving along and make sure we get your get your best practices, because that's what we're here for. So we've heard time and time again through our conversations today how important relationships are. And one of my favorite approaches is this, it's called relationship mapping. And so it's as straightforward as it sounds. Like you literally you have a list of all of your children and youth, and as staff, you sit down and you talk through who of these students has positive relationships with a staff member or who does not. When you have older students, like you're working with high schoolers, maybe even middle schoolers, you can ask the students to respond to survey questions about their connections with adults. The idea is you identify the students in need of these connections, and then you create an action plan to build those relationships. So I have done a lot of work in teacher-student relationships, and the kind of distillation that I have are like 4 key things. So the first one is getting to know your student, right? So what is it that they like? What do they spend their time doing? Do they have siblings? Do they have pets? Asking questions goes a really long way. I do know that there's been studies on kind of those like get to know you surveys at the beginning of the year, and how that not only improves relationships, but it improves academic achievement and closes achievement gaps based on race and ethnicity that they were commonly seen in these schools before they were enacting these surveys, these get to know you surveys. The second one is letting your students get to know you. My students loved to hear about my siblings, about my cat. When I was playing two-hand touch football on the weekends, like they love to hear those stories, to feel like it's an actual relationship, that there is, that you are on the other side of it. The next one is spending quality time. There's a lot of really great research that there's even one study, it's called like banking time. And it's literally about like, you just have to spend more time with the students. And in order to have those opportunities for conversation and connection and building trust in a relationship over time, every minute that you can spend with a student is an investment. And then finally, show that you care. So keeping promises, advocating for what they need, reminding them that they're special to you. This can take a lot of forms, and it depends on your relationship dynamic, depends on you, depends on the student, but they should feel that you care for them. It should be very apparent and obvious to them. I am going to hop to the next one, but if you have any like insight or best practices or things that you maybe coach your staff on about like building relationships with students, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll pull that out to share with everyone. Okay. So because of the interest of time, I'm going to gloss over family engagement, but like I promised, there's going to be a webinar in a couple months where we'll deep dive into this. But family engagement, as you saw in those tiers, is important at every single level. It has really great impacts on the student outcomes and well-being. What we're going to kind of do in this webinar is we're going to talk about this process that you'll go through where you're identifying any barriers that might be preventing families from engaging with this school or with your organization. Then we'll also identify facilitators, so things that are already working, or maybe even people who are kind of like your connectors or your champions. And then there's so many strategies that exist out there because we know the importance of authentic and equitable family engagement. So we'll talk a lot about those engagement strategies. I'm trying to think if I can give you a preview of some of the best practices. I think what I would say is family surveys are going to be really important. This will allow families to kind of share priorities, concerns, or feedback in a safe way. Bringing families and caregivers into decision-making processes through advisory committees or councils. and overall just offering flexibility and variety of options for involvement. So this could mean offering materials for learning at home, providing online or even texting opportunities to connect, and then providing opportunities to engage during the school day, after the school day, on the weekends, right? Being flexible for different work schedules. So I do want to pass it to Stacy though, because Stacy and her center do a lot of family engagement. So Stacy, can you share some of your best practices?
Yeah, for sure. One thing I say to staff often, we can't work and provide treatment if we are isolating or separating it from the families that are involved. So as we work with minors, we are working with their families. And by the way, that feels really good to students too, because students start to realize, hey, this is not a me problem. This is something that my entire family has some buy-in for. We need to be working together so that we can all come to find some answers that are going to help me, help my family, propel us forward. So that feels really good to students. I like to share with my staff as they are meeting and providing therapeutic services. After sessions, quick text messages to parents, not to break confidentiality in any way, but to say something every week to that parent. I just worked with your child today. He was so excited to tell me about the cookout, or he was, just to make it relational, because you really are entering into a personal relationship with that family. I say often to the parents, nobody wants that child to improve more than those parents. And so they may not know how to help that child make improvements. They may not know what that child needs, but they want their child to do better. And so we really want to value that. We want to be a member of the team. And so just finding quick ways to be able to do that every week is so important.
Thank you so much, Stacy. I'm actually going to keep, I'm just going to toss this right back to you. So
Sure.
One of the things that is really important, right, is recognizing that we have our systems in place for tier 1, we can do our absolute best, and having tier 2, but it's really important that we kind of know how to navigate our tier 3 interventions. And I think, Stacy, this is something that you have a lot of experience with, and I would love any support and advice that you might have.
Sure. So when I think about those tier 3 interventions, we really are trying to get at the root cause of whatever it is that's going on that's causing that student problems. And so we have a lot of people in our school environment and in our community environments that are supportive. They might show that they care about the person, they support the person, they check on the person. But I like to think about those tier 3 interventions as being more than support, but really being intervention. What are we going to do? We're going to support, and we are going to do what? And so for members of my team who are all qualified mental health providers, they are going to begin into a therapeutic relationship. They are going to assess, diagnose if necessary, and treat that child, and that is the intervention. So they're going to be working in that therapeutic environment with a student every single week. They are going to engage that student not only in individual psychotherapy, but they're also going to bring the family in for family therapy sessions. Again, that's another perfect example of us incorporating that family and really getting to the root causes of some of the problems. Sometimes that gets tricky, especially when the family is part of the problem. Right? And so that happens a lot of times too. Nonetheless, we need to be working with that family. It may be a family that is deeply rooted in dysfunction, deeply rooted in domestic violence or substance use, but we still have to get to know those family members, care for them, and really provide good psychoeducational services. Oftentimes, we are making referrals for family members. That happens a lot of times too. So it's not only that the student or the child needs that tier 3 intervention, their families need that tier 3 intervention as well. So it's really figuring out what is it that they need. And one thing I have noticed with my team, we are getting stronger every year that we are together as a team in identifying what we can provide. We also are working hard to enhance our skills. So we have people on our team who are experts in trauma. And when I say experts, I really mean that they are trained in using evidence-based practices and interventions. And so those modalities might be that they're providing trauma-focused CBT work. And I'm kind of getting into some really specific language here, perhaps EMDR work with clients or students. So really trying to figure out what can we do as a team that's within our scope of practice. What can we offer for that tier 3? And then we're going to still have a lot of gaps. So looking into our community and figuring out who do we have in our community that can do things that we can't do because it's outside of our scope of practice. And so we are really reeling those in every year. We have behavior techs and board certified behavior analysts, and we have doctors who are providing care for our students. We have people who are working in residential facilities who are providing care to our students. Our list of providers and partners continues to grow. And I think that has equipped us to take better care of people. So I've probably been a little too long-winded there, but I'll let you ask any questions if you have any about that, Teresa.
Thank you, Stacy. No, I think that's super helpful, right? This idea that we do what we can within our set, and then we build our team, right? And one of the things that we're gonna, I'm paying close attention to the time, I'll make sure we get to is talking about partnership practices. I do imagine that this might be a webinar in the future that we do talk about best practices, about building strong relationships and MOAs. So before we hop to that, I'd love to talk about, there we go. I'd love to talk about staff, self, and community care. The definitions up here, I want to just make sure it's really common to hear about self-care, but we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind the relationships that we have and the connections that we have and how our wellness is all kind of connected to each other. So the definition of self-care up here is defined as taking care of oneself to achieve, maintain, and promote optimal health and well-being. Practices can include good sleep hygiene, proper nutrition and exercise, rest and relaxation, and much more. And then rooted in collectivist beliefs, community care focuses on the connections, intentional actions, and efforts to mobilize individuals to support one another. This can include peer support, healing circles, and much more. So just kind of as an orientation, right? A lot of self-care and wellness talks about well-being, right? And understanding what well-being is going to vary a lot depending on the person and their background. And I found these 8 dimensions to be really helpful. So as I'm kind of like reading through these, I think some are going to be more relevant than others when we're talking about self and community care in our workplaces. But emotional well-being refers to the ability to successfully handle life stresses and adapt to change in difficult times. Physical well-being refers to nutrition, exercise, substance use, disease, etc. Occupational well-being refers to personal satisfaction in your job and career. Social well-being refers to social connections, relationships. Spiritual well-being refers to the search for purpose and meaning in life. This may include a belief in a higher power, but spiritual wellness does not have to be aligned with a religion. Intellectual well-being refers to brain health and growth via thought-provoking mental activities. Environmental well-being gets more into our connection to nature and the earth. And then there's financial well-being, which is making sure we have what we need in order to survive, right? To live. I would love to hear, Stacy, you've talked a little bit about your team, but what are some of the approaches that you use to kind of incorporate self and community care into your ways of being and work?
Yeah, so we eat a lot of pie. As soon as I leave this webinar, I am going to go across the hall and I am going to eat a big piece of pie with the staff that I get to work with and serve with every day. And we are going to have some minutes today to take care of each other, to encourage one another, but then to also ask the hard questions. How's everybody doing? How are you all feeling? I'm going to do a check with staff to see how they're feeling about their caseloads, who might need some more help, who has a case that they're working on that's really taxing, because oftentimes they may need a peer to kind of support with them. I have a couple of those cases right now where we're talking about very serious issues and things that we have to really stay on top of. And so it helps if we're not doing that alone. Another thing that I'll bring up, and I just kind of thought of this as I was talking, a lot of times, because the work we are doing is very serious, and because of the staff that I have and the assessments that they're doing to determine if people are a risk to themselves or others, I have also built in to our measurements assessment piece a consultation layer, so that when we're making decisions about someone's risk level, we are picking up the phone, calling a member of our team, and having a second person hear us. This is what I've done. This is how I've assessed. This is where I think I'm at, so that another provider who's on our team can say, yes, that sounds like moderate risk, or yes, I think that you're on the right track, but I think you're missing this piece. That consultation layer has helped really to take better care of the staff on our team, because if something ever goes wrong, we all know people start to point fingers and blame and what happened or where did the system break down. And so I think people have felt better knowing that I'm not doing this by myself. I'm not making these very important or very serious decisions by myself. So taking care of your people, I do weekly staff connects. We don't eat pie every week. I want to eat pie every week. I haven't figured that part out yet. But we do get together every week. We take care of each other every week. We do consultative work. We go and do partner visits as a team, and that helps us also to get to know our partners on a more personal level. So we eat pie with our partners, we enjoy them. We sit down and talk with them. We tour their facilities. So we build that personal relationship. I bring that up too, because that goes along with this very hard work. If I'm on the phone, which I have been today, with a hospital because a student needs acute stabilization and care, it helps me to have that relationship with the person that I'm on the phone with. So really building the relationships with your staff, checking in very often, building in those layers, or I like to call it insulation, like just wrapping care all the way around them, insulate them, and help them to know that you're all in this together and that nobody's really doing the hard work by themselves. Those are some of the things that we try to focus on. We do lots of good training. We enjoy each other. All of those things matter. It's very often, and this happened last night, it was Sunday night, but my team had a group message that was going through and just talking about what it was going to be like today when we were together, and what we were going to do to enjoy ourselves. So really building those relationships, I think, is a big part of it.
I really appreciate that, Stacey. Thank you for sharing all those examples.
Sure.
I would love to hear from everyone else. What are some of the things that you have done in your community, in your work context, to care for yourself and care for your team? What are kind of some of the approaches or things that you've done? Maybe what are some of the things that you wish were being done, right? That would really kind of help you do the work well. I think I'll keep talking while I let people think about that and put it in the chat, or feel free to use the raise hand feature. But I think to kind of echo what you were saying, Stacey, I think the relationships are the most critical component. Just knowing that you're not alone, and kind of fighting those feelings of isolation by being connected and knowing you've got a team behind you, I think really makes the whole difference. My friends and I, when we were teaching, talked about how we were battle buddies. Like that was that was kind of the language that we our relationships were forged in fire, and we were really there for each other, and really supported each other in the work, especially when it got hard. But I'd love to hear from the audience. I think I know this has been a long webinar, but I feel like there's so much good work happening, and so I'd love to hear from y'all.
think she said to raise hand.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna everybody else raise hands first.
Or
You're live, Daniel. We can hear you.
they threw us
Oh,
on.
whatever.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Jerome Anderson here for Self-Awareness and Recovery. Definitely one of the things I would really like to see more so is I'm seeing with a lot of staff working in this this field, social workers, people in school, it's we're all in the practice of mindfulness. However, I understand that really being authentic, right? When it comes to our emotions and even expressing if we are at capacity or even sharing, like you said, distributing evenly the caseloads. Sometimes it can be very overwhelming. And one of the things I've also personally struggled with is feeling the need to, I mean, put my, of course, absolute very best in it, but sometimes I want to save everyone, and it's just not possible. And I'll find myself exhausting myself or not even putting up the proper boundaries that allows me to be the best version of myself as a mentor, a life coach, or even as a coworker. And so just being mindful of that, but also just shattering the stigma that we can't be vulnerable and just say, hey, I'm at capacity right now. Either I need help or I need a break. Yeah.
Self-care, very important. Very important. We're finding that now a lot of us are going through, a little bit of stress, a little bit of trauma, even secondary trauma. I was just acknowledging that secondary trauma thing, hearing from people, hearing what they're going through sometimes affects us, and yeah, like you said, we're at capacity.
And then also being dealing with countertransference, maybe coming in contact with another youth that may triggered a negative response when we had a youth in the past. It could be, and that's not fair to that youth. But just being mindful of that, being able to share that and go being accountable in this field. When someone does see like, hey, what is your caseload like? Or looking at the data and kind of like, okay, strategically planning, how is this going to work out for you or your agency in the long run?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of self-awareness and like knowing when you are at capacity, and then that being able to ask for help. And I think that that's something that we individually work on, but we're also doing it in community, right? That we have to create environments in which people feel comfortable asking for support. And I think Becky also has this great example in the chat where we get into the practice of asking, what do you need? So for those who are still working on the comfort of asking for help, that there's opportunities given to them to do that. I really appreciate that. Thank you both so much for your responses. And then also we heard from Stevie in the chat, fun and free community events like ice skating, bike rides, bowling, education series for families on behavioral health topics. Those are really excellent. Oh, thanks, Jennifer. Good job. Any other thoughts on best practices for self and community care in your spaces? Awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
It's
And
some
I
good
think you muted
times.
yourself. There you go.
So fun events and outings for the youth and the people that we work with are so important. They're so important because it bonds them, it gives them, gives them that opportunity to see what the good life can be also, and so I totally agree with who was that said that? Stevie.
Stevie.
Yes.
Yes,
I
Stevie.
totally agree with those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know I also, am I still on?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Something else I did yesterday with 4 of some crisis interventionists who works in the city of Sacramento. Yesterday, me and 4 of my male counterparts went and got our feet done yesterday. and some massages. It was so funny. She said, so the challenge was to come up with a gender neutral pro-social activity that would alleviate anxiety and something where it showed that we would honor ourselves. And so we sat in the chair for an hour with our backs being massaged while they was working on these dogs. And it felt so great. Yeah. And it was something to where as we shared it with our family and people on social media, they was like, hey, next time you guys go next month, let us all join. So I think it's going to blow up to probably be like 20 or 25 of us.
I love
It's
that
nice.
so
It
much.
was really, really nice.
That's so nice because I feel like that's like a common thing that they say like, oh, you should do this for self-care, but you made it a community care
Yeah.
event, right?
Mhm.
Like you
Yeah.
made it communal. I love that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. So we're getting kind of to the end of our time together. I just want to also pull out one more in the chat. This practice of checking in with coworkers periodically throughout the day. Absolutely, and that things can be light and encouraging and not always about work. I think that's that like human connection, that humanness is also really, really important. And supporting local businesses. Love that. So I'm gonna hop to the end. And like I mentioned, we do kind of see in your futures a webinar where we'll talk more about best practices for school community partnership, because there's a lot of nuance there and there's a lot of balancing needs and priorities and privacy and all of these things. So this is something that will be coming down the pipeline. And so I'd love to just kind of close out with a thank you. Thank you so much for being here for this. I don't know what I just did. I closed the slide, but thank you for being here and putting up with my tech problems today and engaging and sharing your experiences and your best practices. I feel like I've learned so much from you, and I hope that you're also feeling like you learned from your colleagues. We have in the chat, what I'm going to go ahead and put this closeout survey. And if you're like me, I always get a closeout survey at the end of a session. I'm like, ugh, like I don't want to do this right now. But I'm asking you to do it because I will read every single response and we'll use that feedback in order to improve future webinars. And I want to make sure that we're getting you the material you need, but also delivering it in a way that is engaging and valuable and works well for y'all. So thank you, Angela. It's very kind of you. But if you wouldn't mind taking a second to fill out that survey, and then I might pass it back. Ricardo, is there anything that you need to close out with? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a minute. Just thank you. That's kind of where I'm going to start, actually. So, yeah, as we come to the end of today's webinar, just obviously first and foremost, want to thank you and thank Stacy for just the wealth of information and the manner in which the information was shared with everyone today. Just appreciate the graciousness, the encouragement, just very much appreciated. And again, just because I know folks may have joined at different times, just by way of just a super quick recap, we touched on some key foundational issues. So everything that include, like what is trauma, positive impact us, what are the supports that are available individually, collectively, kind of from community level, and closer to the tail end, just even touching on self-care. So if you did end up joining just a little bit late, again, there's just a wealth of things that I think we were able to shed some light on and to talk about and really encourage some feedback on. And it goes without saying, but we hope this information helps you and provides support. I love the way that Stacy, kind of characterized like using these kind of traumatic experiences as a way to bond with your team, which is a really difficult way about thinking about trauma, like not just shunning it or pushing it aside, but so much of our ability to get back up sometimes is really forged in community, right? And so as much as we want to strengthen others, we really have to kind of strengthen ourselves. So I really appreciate that reminder as well. And again, I kind of put this in the chat earlier, but just as a reminder, if folks are available and interested, it's not a requirement, but tomorrow we are also going to offer a virtual office hour, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. You're welcome to join. It'll be an informal session, no PowerPoint, but it'd be a chance for you to just come on, ask questions, continue the conversations. Again, I know that everyone has different learning styles, and sometimes we have a one-on-one setting, maybe a little bit more comfortable. So we are going to make that space available. There's been different versions of this question, but we are definitely going to post the presentation and the webinar. All that will be made available on the website. And Teresa alluded to this as well. So I'll just mention we are planning for a multi-part webinar series in November. I'll just tease that much until it's formally approved, but be on the lookout for the save the dates. Again, a lot of the themes that were raised here today, we're going to kind of delve into further. And again, just as we get more engagement through your interaction with some of your LISC and your WestEd points of contact, it helps us to then kind of formulate some of the discussion topics. So when we engage you or your peers, or we ask, what are the things that you want to talk about? Know that these are kind of a direct manifestation of that. So I just want to close with that. I know Teresa plugged a survey. That's wonderful. I think by default, this webinar and all of our webinars also have a survey. So apologies in advance if you get 2 surveys. As much as you can give us, though, I think hopefully you'll get the overall theme, which is we really do value your input. And as much as we can figure out what best to kind of provide you going forward and what we can improve, is much appreciated. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you again, Teresa. Thank you again, Stacy. We look forward to seeing everyone in November. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.